Hey boys, welcome back to another episode of Low Spec Labs. Today we're doing a quick review. So video was taken in September of 2021 and was basically just a brief attempt at first turboing my fz07. It's been about a year and a half since I began that process, and a lot of progress has been made. So let's dig into what all changes have been done to the bike, the various difficulties and problems I ran into turboing the fz07, whether or not I think this is something that you should do, and things you should look out for once you endeavor in this process. So let's go ahead and let's get started. So let's start with the turbo. I am using a Garrett GT15 turbocharger, or a Chinese clone of a Garrett GT15 turbocharger. I'm pretty sure the official Extreme Creations kit uses an actual GT15. In this case, since we're doing things as cheaply as possible, we're buying a Chinese clone from Amazon for $148. Once you have purchased your turbo, you'll then need to purchase some 1.5-inch exhaust pipe to connect the exhaust gases to the turbo. After that, you'll then need to purchase some exhaust flanges. These are the hardest part to find. You don't necessarily need to purchase them, you can make them, but $50 to purchase one versus a couple hours to make the flange. You decide which is worth more, your time or your money. I'm deciding to be completely forward and honest here. When I started this project, I did not have a welder, so I'm including the cost of purchasing a welder into the project. If you already have a welder, congrats, you get to save a couple $100. So, with all my parts purchased, I then decided to take my first shot at welding together the exhaust manifold. In this case, I cut the old turbo fz07's exhaust apart, and I used some additional pieces of exhaust purchased from Amazon to attempt to do this. Right? The results were mixed. Not very happy with them at all. However, a lesson was learned during this, right? And that lesson is buy the exhaust flanges. They're cheap and they're going to save you so many hours and effort and work. Of course, if you don't have the $50 to $100 to buy the flanges, make them, but just buy them if you can afford to. Then you'll need the oil drain for the turbo, and you'll also need a 1/8 to 6 AN NTP fitting for the oil drain, right? And that's how we're going to get the oil out of the turbo. You'll need this 1/8 T adapter to get the oil feed from the oil pressure sensor. You will also then need a oil filler cap, right? And we're going to tap this cap for the oil return line. Next on the list is a N16-18 UNF tap. This is the tap that we're going to use to tap into the oil drain plug or the oil filler plug and use that to return the oil from the turbo back to the crankcase. Depending on where you mount the turbo, you will need a turbo oil return pump. If you can find a way to mount it higher than the crankcase or higher than the oil fill plug, then it should return by gravity feed, no problem. But in my situation, the turbo's too low to return by gravity feed, so I had to purchase an oil pump. I went with this pump because it's a gear-based oil pump. It has copper gears, which means it's suitable for the high temp scenario of transferring hot oil from the turbo back to the fz07's crankcase. I also went ahead and purchased some mounting brackets for this pump. So you're going to have to remove the little square brackets that come with it, install the mounting brackets I include in this video, and then that's it. Just remove like one of your engine mount bolts and bolt the bracket back on, and everything should go together like butter. You'll then need a 3/8 to 6 AN adapter to connect the oil return pump to the rest of your 6 AN fittings. Speaking of 6 AN fittings, don't forget to buy your 6 AN hose kit as well as an additional set of 6 AN adapters. You will need them. You will also need to purchase a 4 AN turbo oil feed line to screw into the top of the turbo. The turbo might actually come with a 4 AN fitting already screwed in. Some of them do, some of them don't. But just in case, here's a 4 AN turbo feed fitting as well. You will then need a wideband O2 sensor. I suggest this AEM unit. It's the one I'm using on the build. Works pretty good. And of course, we're going to need a boost gauge. So another $20 and we're good to go. After that, we then have the control fueling, and to do that, we're going to be using two things: a fuel pressure regulator to raise the fuel pressure to kind of get more fuel flowing through the injectors, and a power commander to control spark advance or retardation, and also to control fueling as well. And of course, we will need a blow-off valve. Almost forgot that one. At this point, we technically have everything we need for us to put the Turbo fz07 together. But having the parts necessary and putting it together is two different things, right? I thought I'd go ahead and let you know the various issues I ran into and give you some tips and tricks in case you want to tackle this job yourself, right? So I tried to weld together the original intake, or rather I tried to cut apart the original intake and re-weld it back together and copy Extreme Creations turbo mounting solution, where they mount the turbo to the back of the fz07, like where the catalytic converter used to go. Unfortunately, my welding skills are not that good, and I wasn't able to replicate that. So instead, I mounted the turbo kind of to the side of the engine. I found this a lot easier to weld together using my flux core welder, and mostly I just had to use my angle grinder to cut apart some 90s, tack things together, right? I did use some collar pieces to reinforce the welds because I didn't trust them. If you have the right tools and skill set, it's probably pretty easy for you to make your own flanges, right? Unfortunately, we here at Low Spec Labs did not have the right tools when we started, nor did we have the right skill set. And you can see the quality in our flanges as a result. So I highly suggest you just purchase one and save yourself the time and effort of having to fabricate the flanges together. The next puzzle to solve was how I was going to get the oil into the turbo and from the turbo back into the crankcase. I tried a couple different oil pumps before settling on this one. This one uses copper gears to transfer the oil, and in high heat scenarios, that's the perfect candidate. The other pumps I used ended up failing after a couple short rides, but this one has no problem. So I made a TikTok when I first put this together on how I put it together, right? And I don't feel like editing things twice, so I'm going to play that for you guys real quick.
Mount your oil return pump for your Turbo fz07 and the parts you need to figure this out. Let's start with the gear-based oil return pump. It's $65 on Amazon. Then we need a mount for the pump. That's another 20 bucks. After that, we need some 6AN hose line and 6AN fittings. That's another 40 bucks. You'll then need these 3/8 to 6AN NPT adapter fittings so you can hook up the oil pump to the 6AN lines. You'll need two, so that's going to be another 20 bucks. After that, you'll need to buy an aluminum oil cap, 20 bucks. A 6AN fitting for 7 bucks. And then a 9/16-18 tap and die kit for 20 bucks. Sum total is about 200 bucks. And you now have a convenient way for you to return the oil from the turbo back to your fz07's crankcase.
After that, you'll need some way to activate the oil pump when the fz07 turns on, right? An easy way to do that is to tap the accessory harness. The accessory harness uses like a 2-amp fuse, so you'll want to replace that with like a 10-amp fuse, right? And then maybe wire and line a 5-amp fuse to the pump's 12-volt feed. I ordered an 1.5-inch mandrel bend, right, and cut it up into various segments, straight segments, and then two various, 45-degree U segments, right? I then welded those two together, drilled and tapped a hole for the blow-off valve, and then drilled and tapped a hole for the boost gauge, and put it together. But honestly, having used this setup, I think you should, or you would be better off or better served creating an airbox like so. And I suggest the airbox because I did some online reading, and they said you're going to make more volume with an air, like you have more airflow basically, right? The box has more volume than the simple U-bends of the 1.5-inch pipe. So by making the airbox, you can actually get more power and more boost. So I highly suggest that. The airbox is actually my third attempt at making the fz07 turbos intake, and I would say this is the best option so far. After you're done cutting, fabbing, welding, you should get something that looks like this. Look at that. Right. This is about a year's worth of on again, off again work, and it's still not done. Right. Uh, Despite the parts list, I did end up spending quite a bit more than 1.5K as I rebought parts and tried to figure out how to make different parts work together well. Right. But hey, it's working, and I can honestly say it was worth it. It hauls ass, boys. Right. This is a very fun project, and I learned a lot while partaking of it. So, objective completed. If you enjoyed this walkthrough, please feel free to hit the like and subscribe button, and I'm gonna pump out more content. So, thanks for watching. Bye, boys.